The shell casing hit the concrete before Corporal James Caldwell even registered pulling the trigger. His hands moved on instinct now, loading, firing, tracking. The Stukas scream tore through the air like a knife through fabric, and somewhere in the back of his shattered mind, Jimmy wondered if this would be the one that finally killed him. It was May 10th, 1942, the 89th air raid in 7 days. 3 months earlier, Jimmy Caldwell had stepped off the transport ship at Grand Harbor with his kit bag over his shoulder and something resembling optimism in his chest. Malta was supposed to be a posting, not a death sentence. The island sat like a stone in the Mediterranean, barely larger than his hometown of Manchester. Yet somehow it had become the most bombed place on earth. "Welcome to hell, lads," Sergeant Morris had said, his face lined with exhaustion that went deeper than lack of sleep. "You'll be on Bofors duty. 4-man crews, 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer." Jimmy had nodded, eager, ready. He'd trained for this. Royal Artillery, they'd told him, was the shield of the Empire. He'd protect the harbors, the airfields, the people. Noble work. That optimism died somewhere around the 3rd week. The Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft gun was a Swedish design, efficient and deadly when handled correctly. Jimmy's crew operated Gun Position 7, overlooking Valletta's harbor. Their job was simple in theory: track incoming German and Italian aircraft, calculate lead time, fire in controlled bursts, bring them down before they could drop their bombs. In practice, it meant standing exposed on a concrete platform while Stukas screamed down at you, while Ju-88s carpet-bombed the docks, while Me-109s strafed anything that moved. It meant watching the sky turn black with aircraft, hearing the whistle of bombs, feeling the ground shake as buildings collapsed into rubble. It meant watching your friends die. Tommy had been the first. Tommy Richardson, a kid from Liverpool with red hair and a laugh that could cut through any darkness. He'd been bringing ammunition from the bunker when the blast hit. Jimmy hadn't seen it happen, only heard the explosion and then saw what was left. Then came Davies, then Corporal Mitchell, then young Peter, who'd only been on the island 2 weeks. Now Jimmy's crew consisted of himself, Sergeant Morris, and 2 replacements who'd arrived yesterday and hadn't even learned to properly sight the gun yet. Their names were Harris and Webb, but Jimmy hadn't bothered learning much more than that. Learning names felt dangerous now, like tempting fate. The Stuka pulled up from its dive, having dropped its payload somewhere in the city. Jimmy tracked it with the gun barrel, fired a burst, watched the tracers arc through the sky and miss by meters. The plane banked hard right and disappeared behind a cloud of smoke rising from the harbor. "Reload!" Morris shouted, his voice hoarse from days of screaming over explosions. Harris fumbled with the ammunition magazine. His hand shook. Webb stared at the sky with the wide-eyed look of someone who'd just realized where he was and what that meant. Jimmy said nothing. He kept his eyes on the horizon, searching for the next target. They'd come. They always came. The air raid siren had stopped surprising him. It wailed constantly now, sometimes for hours without pause. The sound had worked its way into Jimmy's skull, becoming a permanent ringing that never quite went away even in the brief moments of silence. Sleep was impossible. When the raid stopped long enough for him to close his eyes, his mind replayed every near miss, every explosion, every face of every man he'd served with who wasn't alive anymore. When he did manage to drift off, the dreams were worse than the waking hours. Food was scarce. The island was under siege, supplies coming in only by convoy, and most of those convoys never made it. U-boats prowled the Mediterranean. The Luftwaffe attacked anything that moved. Malta was starving. Jimmy had lost weight. They all had. His uniform hung loose on his frame. His face, he had noticed in a broken mirror 2 days ago, looked hollow. His eyes had developed a 1,000-yard stare he'd seen in veterans back in England, men who'd survived the First War and never quite made it home, even after the fighting stopped. He was 24 years old and felt ancient. "Incoming!" Webb shouted, pointing northeast. Jimmy's head snapped around. A formation of Ju-88 bombers, maybe 15 strong, approaching in a steady line. Behind them, higher up, he could see the distinctive shapes of Italian Mach fighters providing escort. "Range 1,200 meters," Morris called out, already calculating. Wait for it. Wait! Jimmy's hands tightened on the gun controls. This was the part that never got easier. The waiting. Watching them come closer, knowing that in moments they'd be dropping tons of high explosive on the harbor, on the city, on positions just like this one. The gun's mechanism was simple enough. Traverse left and right, elevate up and down, fire in controlled bursts to conserve ammunition. Lead the target, account for wind, watch for traces to adjust aim. Mechanical, mathematical, except the targets were real, the bombs were real, and the men operating the guns were made of flesh that tore and burned and bled. Fire! Jimmy opened up. The Bofors roared, the familiar jackhammer recoil vibrating through his entire body. Spent casings clattered to the concrete. The acrid smell of cordite filled his nose. Tracers streaked across the sky, orange lines against blue. The lead Ju-88 took hits. Jimmy saw pieces fly off the wing, saw smoke trail behind it. The bomber wobbled, but stayed airborne, continuing its approach. The formation didn't break. They never broke. Professional, disciplined, they came on like a machine. Bombs fell. Jimmy kept firing, tracking the next target. Around him, other gun positions opened up, the sky filled with flak, a deadly garden of explosions and tracer fire. The Maki fighters dove, strafing the gun positions. Bullets sparked off concrete. Someone screamed. The first bombs hit the harbor. Massive geysers of water erupted skyward. A destroyer moored at the docks took a direct hit and simply disintegrated in a fireball that sent debris hundreds of meters into the air. Jimmy traversed right, found another bomber in his sights, fired. The recoil, the noise, the chaos, it all blended together into a single, continuous nightmare that had no beginning and no end. Just an eternal present of violence and death. A Maki fighter came in low and fast. Jimmy swung the gun around, fired a burst. The fighter's canopy shattered. The plane cartwheeled into the harbor, hitting the water with a splash that seemed absurdly small compared to the destruction happening all around. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The bombers completed their run and turned for home. The fighters followed. The guns fell silent. The only sounds were the crackle of fires burning across the harbor and the screams of the wounded. Jimmy's hands remained on the gun controls. His body didn't know how to relax anymore. Even in the silence, every muscle stayed tensed, waiting for the next attack. "Check ammunition," Morris said quietly. His voice sounded dead, automatic. Harris and Webb moved to inventory what they had left. Jimmy stayed on the gun. Someone had to watch the sky. An hour passed, then 2. The fires burned. Rescue crews worked through the rubble. Somewhere in the city, an ambulance siren wailed. Life continued in the strange, fractured way it did on Malta, suspended between one attack and the next. Jimmy's shift was supposed to end at 1800 hours. It was now past 2000, and no relief crew had arrived. Probably dead, he thought, with the casual indifference that came from accepting death as the default outcome. "Get some food," Morris told him. "I'll watch." Jimmy didn't want to. Leave the gun. Leaving felt dangerous. Like the moment he stepped away would be the moment they came back. But his body was failing. He needed food, needed water, needed something. He climbed down from the platform and walked toward the bunker that served as their shelter. His legs felt unsteady, like they might give out at any moment. How long had he been standing? 8 hours? 10? Time had stopped meaning anything concrete. The bunker was a reinforced concrete structure half buried in the hillside. Inside, it was dark and damp and smelled of unwashed men and fear. A single oil lamp provided light. 3 other gunners sat on ammunition crates, eating from tins of bully beef. Jimmy recognized one of them, Corporal Andrews from Gun Position 4. They'd trained together back in England, lifetimes ago. "How many today?" Andrews asked. "Lost count," Jimmy said. He grabbed a tin from the supply crate, pried it open with his knife. The meat inside looked gray and unappetizing, but he shoveled it into his mouth anyway. Fuel, nothing more. "Heard Position 9 took a direct hit," one of the other men said. "Whole crew gone." No one responded. What was there to say? Position 9 today could be Position 7 tomorrow. Could be Position 4. Could be all of them. Jimmy ate mechanically, forcing down the tasteless food. His mind drifted unbidden to home, to Manchester, to streets that didn't burn, to skies that weren't filled with death, to his mother, his sister. Were they still alive? Was Manchester still standing? The last letter he'd received was 3 months old. Anything could have happened since then. "You all right, Caldwell?" Jimmy looked up. Andrews was watching him with concern that seemed out of place in this grey concrete tomb. "Fine," Jimmy said automatically. "You don't look fine." "None of us look fine." Andrews couldn't argue with that. He turned back to his food. Jimmy finished eating and stood. His body protested, every muscle aching. He needed to get back to the gun, needed to be ready. As he walked toward the bunker exit, the air raid siren began to wail. Again. Jimmy ran. By the time he reached gun position 7, the bombers were already visible on the horizon. Stukas this time, dozens of them, coming in from the north. Their distinctive gull wings and fixed landing gear made them easy to identify. They were dive bombers, precision weapons designed to drop their payloads directly on target, which meant they'd come lower, which meant better chances to hit them, which also meant they'd be close enough to see the men they were trying to kill. "Positions!" Morris shouted. Jimmy grabbed the gun controls. Harris and Webb scrambled to ready the ammunition. The familiar routine, the mechanical movements that kept them alive. The Stukas began their dives. The sound they made was designed to terrify. The Germans had mounted sirens on the planes specifically to create that banshee wail, that shriek that bypassed rational thought and struck directly at the primitive parts of the brain that understood predators and death. It worked. Jimmy forced himself to focus. Picked a target, the lead Stuka, diving almost vertically, its bomb visible under the fuselage. He led it, calculating the descent rate, the speed. Fired. The Bofors bucked in his hands. Tracers streaked upward. The Stuka kept coming. He fired again and again. Hits. He saw them strike the engine cowling, saw smoke. The Stuka wobbled, but didn't pull up. It released its bomb at 500 meters and then finally banked hard, trailing black smoke as it struggled for altitude. The bomb fell toward the harbor. Jimmy didn't watch where it landed. He was already tracking the next target. Fire. Reload. Fire. The world compressed to this simple cycle. Nothing else existed. Nothing else could exist. A Stuka exploded in midair, hit by flak from another position. Debris rained down. Another dove through the explosion, undeterred, and dropped its bomb on a warehouse at the docks. The building erupted in flames. They kept coming. Jimmy's arms burned. His ears rang despite the cotton wadding stuffed in them. His vision narrowed to a tunnel focused on the gun sight and the targets beyond. He existed in a state beyond exhaustion, running on adrenaline and fear and the simple imperative to survive the next 60 seconds. A Stuka dove directly at gun position 7. Jimmy saw it coming, watched it line up. The pilot knew what he was doing, had probably done this 100 times. The Stuka's nose pointed straight at them like an accusing finger. This was it. This was the one. Jimmy kept firing. Pointless, maybe, but he wasn't going to die cowering. The gun roared. Tracers arced up. The Stuka came on. 500 meters. 400. He could see the bomb clearly now, suspended under the fuselage. Could see the pilot in the cockpit, faceless behind goggles and oxygen mask, but human nonetheless. Another man doing his job in this insane machinery of war. 300 meters. The bomb released. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Jimmy watched the bomb separate from the aircraft. Watched the Stuka pull up hard, its engine screaming. Watched the bomb continue its trajectory, falling directly toward them. Time to move, time to run, time to do something. Jimmy's body wouldn't respond. He stood frozen, hands still on the gun controls, watching his death approach. Then someone hit him from the side. Morris. The sergeant tackled him off the platform, and they both crashed to the concrete behind the gun shield as the world exploded. The blast wave hit like a physical thing, a giant, invisible fist that picked Jimmy up and threw him against the bunker wall. His head cracked against concrete, his vision filled with white light, then stars, then nothing. He came to seconds or minutes or hours later. Couldn't tell. His ears weren't working properly, everything muffled and distant. He tasted blood. His left arm wouldn't move right. Jimmy pushed himself up to his knees, his head spinning. The world swam in and out of focus. Gun position 7 was gone. The Bofors lay on its side, twisted metal and broken mechanisms. The concrete platform had a crater in it the size of a car. Smoke and dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Morris lay nearby, not moving. Jimmy crawled toward him, his limbs not quite obeying commands. He reached the sergeant and rolled him over. Morris's eyes were open but not seeing anything. Blood ran from his nose and ears. The blast wave had killed him without leaving a visible wound, the pressure rupturing something vital inside. Jimmy sat there, kneeling beside the dead sergeant, and felt something inside himself break. Not dramatically, not with tears or screams, just a quiet cracking sound deep in his chest, like ice giving way. He'd seen men die before, had watched friends torn apart, burned, buried in rubble. But Morris had been constant. Morris had been there from the beginning, an anchor in the chaos. And now, Morris was gone, killed, saving Jimmy's life. For what? So Jimmy could keep fighting? Keep standing on this platform waiting for the next bomb? Keep existing in this hell that had no end? Jimmy stood. His legs shook but held. He looked at the ruined gun position, at Morris's body, at the smoke rising from a dozen fires across the harbor. He could leave, just walk away. The position was destroyed anyway. The gun was inoperable. No one would blame him for falling back to another position, or to the bunker, or just disappearing into the maze of ruins that Valletta had become. He could be done. He could stop. The thought hung there, tempting, so tempting. Then Jimmy looked up at the sky, still blue between the smoke clouds, still empty of aircraft, but they'd be back. They always came back. And if he left, if everyone left, the Germans would win. Malta would fall. The Mediterranean would become Axis territory. The war would shift, tilting further toward the darkness. All because men like Jimmy gave up. He turned away from Morris's body and walked down the hillside toward the supply depot. His arm hung uselessly at his side, probably broken. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead. He didn't care. At the depot, he found Lieutenant Hayes coordinating ammunition distribution. Hayes looked up as Jimmy approached, his expression tight. "Caldwell, your position?" "Destroyed," Jimmy said. His voice sounded strange in his ringing ears, distant and flat. "Morris is dead. I need a new assignment." Hayes studied him for a long moment. Jimmy could see the calculation happening behind the officer's eyes. This man was at his breaking point, maybe past it. Was he still functional? "Position 12 needs a gunner," Hayes said finally. "Report there immediately." Jimmy nodded and walked away. Position 12 was on the other side of the harbor, near the submarine pens. He'd been there once, weeks ago. Seemed like years now. The walk took him through parts of Valletta he hadn't seen in days. The destruction was biblical. Entire streets simply gone, reduced to rubble and twisted metal. Bodies lay where they'd fallen, covered with whatever cloth could be spared. Survivors picked through ruins, searching for anything salvageable. A woman sat in what had been her doorway, holding a child who wasn't moving. She rocked slowly, singing something soft that Jimmy couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. He walked past, unable to help, unable to do anything but keep moving toward his next assignment. Position 12's crew consisted of 2 men, Gunner First Class Roberts and Private Chen. They looked up as Jimmy climbed onto their platform, taking in his bloodied appearance with the tired acceptance of men who'd seen worse. "Reinforcement?" Roberts asked. "Replacement," Jimmy said. Roberts nodded. "You know the Bofors? 4 months. Good enough. Chen, show him the ready room." The next 3 days blurred together into a continuous cycle of raids and repairs, firing and waiting, surviving and watching others die. Position 12 saw action 14 times. They shot down 2 confirmed aircraft and damaged at least 4 others. Chen died on the 2nd day when shrapnel from a near miss opened his throat. His replacement, a kid named Morrison, lasted 6 hours before a strafing run caught him exposed. Jimmy kept firing. On May 13th, the largest raid yet hit Malta. Over 200 German and Italian aircraft attacked in waves, bombing everything that still stood. The sky turned black with them. Anti-aircraft fire filled the air so thick it looked like a solid wall of metal and flame. Jimmy stood at the gun, tracking, firing, reloading. His movements had become purely automatic now. His mind had gone somewhere else, somewhere distant and safe, while his body performed the mechanical tasks that kept him alive. A Stuka dove through the flak. Jimmy tracked it, fired, missed, fired again. The Stuka released its bomb and pulled up sharply. The bomb hit an ammunition dump 300 meters away. The explosion was magnificent in its horror. A fireball rose 1,000 meters into the sky. The shock wave rolled across the harbor like a visible thing, shattering windows, collapsing weakened buildings. The heat washed over Jimmy's position, making him stumble backward. When the debris stopped falling, an entire section of the harbor district was simply gone, erased. Hundreds of people who'd been alive seconds ago were now vapor and ash. Jimmy kept firing. The raid finally ended as night fell. The guns fell silent. The fires burned. Malta endured. Jimmy climbed down from the platform and sat with his back against the gun shield. Roberts had disappeared somewhere, probably dead. Jimmy didn't have the energy to look for him. Didn't have the energy for anything except sitting there, staring at nothing. His hands shook. Not from exhaustion, though he was exhausted. Not from fear, though fear had become his constant companion. They shook because something fundamental in his nervous system had broken, some connection between brain and body that no longer worked correctly. He wondered, in a distant sort of way, if he'd ever be able to stop the shaking. If he survived this, if the war ended, if he somehow made it back to Manchester, would his hands still shake? Would he still hear the sirens? Would he still see Stukas every time he looked at the sky? Probably. Caldwell. Jimmy looked up. Lieutenant Hayes stood there, his uniform dirty, his face haggard. "Sir, you're being rotated out. Hospital ship leaves at 600. Jimmy processed this slowly, like Hayes was speaking a foreign language. "I'm fine, sir." "You're not. Look at yourself." Jimmy looked down at his hands. They were shaking so badly he could hardly keep them still. His uniform was torn and blood-stained. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept, or eaten, or done anything except fire the gun. "There'll be others to man the guns," Hayes said, his voice gentler than before. "You've done enough." "Have I?" The question came out bitter. Hayes was quiet for a moment. "What you've done here, what all of you have done, you've held. Against everything they threw at us, you held. That's enough." Jimmy wanted to believe that. Wanted to feel like the sacrifice had meant something, but all he could see was the faces of the dead. Tommy, Davies, Mitchell, young Peter, Morris, Chen, Morrison, dozens more whose names he couldn't quite remember through the fog in his head. Had it been enough? Could any amount of holding be enough to justify what they'd lost? But he stood anyway, because that's what you did. You stood. You endured. You held the line because someone had to, and if not you, then who? "Yes, sir," he said. The hospital ship left Grand Harbor at dawn on May 14th. Jimmy stood at the rail, watching Malta recede into the distance. The island was barely visible through the smoke that still rose from 100 fires. Even from here, even sailing away, he could see the devastation that had been wrought. As the ship cleared the harbor, the air raid siren began to wail across the island. They were coming again. Jimmy's hands tightened on the rail. Every instinct screamed at him to find a gun, to man a position, to do something, but there was nothing to do. He was leaving. Others would fight today's battle. He watched until Malta disappeared over the horizon, and even then he kept watching, kept listening for the sound of aircraft engines, kept waiting for the whistling of falling bombs. The war would continue. The siege would continue. Men would die, and others would take their place, and the machinery of violence would grind on until someone won or everyone lost. But Corporal James Caldwell's war, at least for now, was over. He turned away from the rail and went below deck, his hands still shaking, the sirens still ringing in ears that would never quite hear silence again. Malta would hold. It had to. Because if 4 months of hell had taught Jimmy anything, it was that some positions couldn't be abandoned, no matter the cost. even if the cost was everything.